Warning! The following review contains minor spoilers for Captain America: Civil War. You've been warned. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes podcast.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and we're coming to you today with a special episode covering a movie that we have been pumped for like a year now, Tony. I don't remember when the first trailer came out, but we've been pumped.
It's been
at
least a year. Like, at least a year since we started seeing screens and started getting really excited for this one. We were excited whenever we saw it on, like, their big Phase 3 sheet and everything. Like, just seeing it looming in the distance.
It is Captain America: Civil War.
Getting into this movie, like, it's one of those anticipated comic book arcs that's kind of notorious because it flips a lot of things on its head. Like, all the good guys are fighting each other, hence the Civil War title. It's just a really exciting arc to get into.
Well, and I've heard too, the comics that this is based on started off really strong and kind of went off the rails at the end, where the people who were for the Accords sort of started seeming a lot more like douchebags. That's only secondhand information because I didn't read all those comics, but I really felt like that as a self-contained story, as a port over of that idea of two sides being 100% right and yet being in complete opposition to each other. And I say 100% right. I equally as right.
It's easy to see why, like, Tony Stark would be for the Sokovia Accords. It's easy to see why Captain America would be against them. Like, it's not a black and white issue.
Well, it's not just Cap and Steve either. I mean, this movie is full of scenes of people coming at each other from different points of view that aren't wrong. I mean, it's a small part, but Vision and Wanda, their moments together where Vision is trying to keep her, safe. Like, he has his motivations of, I want people to see you as, like, I see you, not as somebody dangerous, but also he's kind of the tool of the people who are trying to keep her away from the public so that she won't freak everybody out. And she's kind of on his side, but she's also being sort of oppressed. It's a weird, like, that whole thing is kind of interesting feminist angle where
it's polite incarceration there, really.
Yeah. And, there's not a wrong side there. Vision isn't doing this because he's evil or because he wants to keep Wanda down, but he might still be doing the wrong thing.
As far as the pacing in this, I felt like it started out a little bit choppy, a little bit fast, but once it actually, like, set all the pieces on the table, it started to flow into a really, really strong movie.
I thought, man, pacing-wise, I didn't have any issues at all. We kick off, right, with sort of a throwback to Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where they're fighting Crossbones. You have a great action scene there that kind of sets things up and sort of gives us the tone of what's going to happen in the movie, gives us that main conflict, but it's really a fight that doesn't matter. It's just getting us to a place where, once again, the Avengers have caused collateral damage and obviously, I mean, if this guy had gotten what he wanted, there would have been much worse damage, but still, they were the ones ultimately who ended up hurting people rather than the villains directly. So it looks bad for them. And that comes, we see that scene we saw in the trailer where General Ross is like, look, guys, I think he's the Secretary of State now, but he said, he shows them the footage and talks about all the stuff that's led up to this. Says, you guys are always in a place where bad things are happening. And there's the sort of knee-jerk, well, yeah, but it was the bad guys, to which Paul Bettany's Vision very accurately points out, before we showed up, we meaning, superpowered heroes, none of this superpowered bad guys were going on.
Yeah, it's the correlation between near species-ending events and the rise of the, like, what do they call them? Enhanced humans?
Yes, they talk about enhanced. That's the term they use, which makes me wonder, like, how bad they wish they had the X-Men back right now. They're like using an all-encompassing terms for people. Which, I mean, I guess Tony Stark is enhanced when he has the armor on. He's just a normal dude.
I think they consider him like metahuman or something like that, where he's not physically enhanced, but he's just so smart and so good at what he does that he's sort of enhanced.
I can't use the term metahuman at all because that's the Flash's term, Tony. I mean, it might be useful elsewhere, but I would not apply that to Tony because of how much The Flash I've watched and knowing about how they use that term. So maybe that's accurate, but that's not the word I would use.
We might have to go ask the comic noobs a little bit later on exactly what it is. I remember listening to one where they said that Tony Stark is not quite enhanced, but he's not quite normal.
He enhances himself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be very careful. There are many details of the plot here that are important, and I don't want to give them away. So we're going to be very spoilers light on this show. But there are things that I wish I could talk about because, I mean, the plot fits together really well. This is a plot that seems, it's not complicated in the sense that you can't understand it, but it has a lot of moving pieces. Feels like a clock that's all sort of just winding together as the movie progresses. And all those pieces really worked, in my opinion.
Yeah. Like I said, for me, it was a little bit choppy in the beginning, but they had so much to set up that if they didn't kind of go breakneck with it, you would end up having some real issues further in.
Speaking of the beginning, the things that I found choppy were, and I had noticed some people complaining about it in the trailers and in some clips they released, and I really saw it in the fight with Crossbones. There was some really choppy editing, and I know that that's sort of the thing of the times where you have these really quick flash cuts of, fights to make it seem more intense, but you got the choreography, guys. It's not like you have to cut to make it look more impressive. And to be honest,
look at the fight at the airport later. They took their time with that.
Right. And it just feels like, I mean, maybe it was to give that fight early a little bit different feel. But when I see a cut that looks like it's maybe 15 frames long, I wonder what was even the point of showing that? Like, why did you even shoot that footage to be like, like, what? I get you can go for a little longer. I'm not saying there's no value to shortcuts like that. And I'm not even saying that they necessarily used it wrong. I am not a genius filmmaker person by any stretch of the imagination. But to me, some of that did feel a little bit jarring and a little bit like you could just show this as a fight and it would still have the same visceral impact. And you don't need to have some of that like fancy cutting Paul Greengrass shaky cam stuff. The things that I love about this film is how perfectly character driven that it is. We mentioned this earlier on, but there are so many scenes where a person does something and it just makes sense for who they are. Nothing ever feels like it's been sort of machinations by the plot. Every time there's a couple moments where things are orchestrated, but they are actually orchestrated by a person. And if one of the criticisms I think people might have is that the villain of this almost feels like a plot device. There's a sense in that if this story is the clock, he's like the spring that's driving everything forward. He's the guy who's dropping these moments that are pushing these people forward, but that is all to his purpose. It's not like he's just winging it and throwing, lobbing hand grenades everywhere and to see what would happen. He's actually got a plan, and it's like he's writing the story of the movie within the movie. And I think that might not work for some people, but for me, it really worked.
I think there's only one thing that didn't work for me, and it's closer to the end, so it'd be a little bit too spoilery to talk. And it's nothing even it's not even anything that big. They set some time aside to set up some people that they couldn't even end up using. That was one of the only things I had a problem with him. I don't know. I think there's a whole debate about Marvel and their villains. I say a debate. This sort of cliched thing of Marvel villains tend not to be the focus of the movie. And Zemo in this movie, who is the villain, in a way, I'm really glad that he is a quote-unquote weak villain. He doesn't have a huge screen presence, right? Like he's not Loki, he's not bombastic, and he doesn't have a lot of screen time even. But A, he drives the plot forward in a really interesting way, and B, him kind of almost being a secondary or tertiary character really gets you out of the, okay, well now we can stop fighting and fight the bad guy thing, which I was worried that they would do, Tony. And a little bit of a spoiler, this movie doesn't stop that. This movie doesn't go and be like, all right, well now we're friends now and we've stopped fighting. Like you think they're going to go in that direction, and then they actually don't
They pay off the Civil War thing. It's Civil War all the way through, even to the very end.
Yeah, they set up kind of a bombshell, like, just to make sure that it doesn't go that way. It's not the, like, Doomsday popping up in the middle of BVS thing.
And the other great thing about Zemo is he's just a normal guy. He doesn't have powers. He's not even, I mean, he's got a good plan, but he doesn't come across as some kind of a supervillain. He doesn't do a lot of monologues. He's just a guy who wants to see the Avengers fail because of personal reasons. He's not being manipulated by Thanos, probably. Thanos.
Yeah, I never got. He seemed like the lone wolf type more than anything. Didn't
right,
seem
even
like,
to the point where one of the things he does requires him to send a package and wait for the notification that it's been delivered before he can carry out the next part of his plan, because he's all on his own. He doesn't have a giant team. He doesn't have like some conspiracy of Hydra helping him out. I was worried that was going to come back, like the third arm of Hydra would somehow rise up and be another problem. But no, Hydra's on the run. They actually defeated him in the previous movie. They didn't go back on that. And Zemo's just on his own, doing his own thing and playing to these people's very real personal fears and issues.
I really did like the actor selection for him too. I hadn't seen that guy since Inglourious Bastards. He was the sniper.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that. He looked kind of familiar, but he definitely played a really interesting part. To me, though, maybe the most fascinating thing is that in Captain America Civil War, the character that has the biggest arc, the character that feels like they've gone from point A to point B in a really strong, believable way, is Black Panther.
Yeah,
Black Panther
definitely
is, in essence, the heart of this movie. He is the person who learns something from all of this crap. Captain America and Iron Man really start at these points, and I mean, I'm not going to say they don't have any character development at all, but they really hold their ground, and it's not like one or the other of them at the end is just saying like, well, I was wrong. Captain America still feels like he's right and still feels like the Avengers should be on their own, and Iron Man still feels like that he was right and he did the right thing. And you can't blame either one of them by the end of this. It's such a brilliantly crafted piece of plotting. And it was great to have Black Panther in there, to have that arc, because you needed somebody to learn something, I think. I think that was, if you hadn't had him and his scenes towards the end, and I don't want to give specifics over what his arc is because that would spoil something big that happens early on to him. But if you don't have those scenes of him becoming and overcoming his issues, you don't have a sort of a reason for this film to exist. And him learning the things that he learns, I think, gives the film an emotional core that it would lack otherwise. It's brilliant use of that character.
It's also kind of interesting just to have the guy that's he's a little bit on the gray side of things for a while. Like, his motivations are very, very clear, but you don't really know which side he's going to land on in the end.
Well, and him and Tony end up with the same motivation, right? But he learns something that Tony doesn't. Again, not to give spoilers if you guys haven't seen it, but I think he finds a way to let go, whereas Tony, in the moments that he's experiencing the things he's experienced, doesn't. Tony can't let go of what, and of course for Tony it's a lot more raw, it's a lot more visceral, it's sort of a big reveal to him, but it's still about not holding on to the past as much as, and I really, personally, I dig that. I find that theme to be really powerful.
Definitely. I also just really like his fighting style, because it's still a lot of the same, like, oh, it's just hand-to-hand type stuff, but just with the claws and with everything else, he's a lot of fun to watch. He's so fast, he's strong, he's just a really smart guy. It's basically what people have been saying, where he's like a black version of Batman.
Well, and he's great too, because he doesn't have superpowers. He's just a ninja, but he has basically impenetrable armor, so you could shoot him or punch him or whatever, and he's not gonna die. I mean, if you threw him from a plane, he might not survive, but there's a lot of punishment that he can take. And I mean, one of the best things in this film, and the Russos have played around with speed a little bit in the previous Captain America movies, where you see him, the last Captain America movie, so Winter Soldier, where he's going across the ship and just running and taking people out. The scene in the highway where they're running along with the cars and keeping pace, like that's some intense stuff. I mean, I'm sure that they had, they filmed it with a little bit maybe slowed down and the cars weren't going at full speed, but you can still tell those guys are booking it. And that's not a special effect, really. That's just some guys who are running really fast. You got some Terminator 2 action with the T-1000 where he's just like running after John Connor super fast.
Yeah, well, you got like Bucky on a motorcycle. Yeah,
sorry,
you got Bucky weaving through cars on a motorcycle and he still can't shake Black Panther.
Yeah, well, it is a little bit of a, packed. He's not going out like on the interstate, like, I mean, it's realistic enough where you buy and Black Panther jumps on the back of a car. So it's not stupid over the top, but just that the kinetics of that scene, each of these different scenes almost has such an amazingly different feel, where in that scene you have so much motion, right? You have the moving along the road and, obviously from the, jumping out of the high rise. And right before that, you had the scene in the high rise where you had this very enclosed kind of claustrophobic fighting in that stairwell, trying to get down to where, his stuff was. And then you had that very kinetic, very motion-based fight scene where they're on cars and motorcycles and stuff like that. You started off the movie with, the Crossbones fight, which is, again, the editing was a little bit choppy, but still you have that more raw, visceral, just punching each other feel. And then eventually you get to, the airport scene, which is, again, pulls back a little bit and lets you kind of just experience the scope and the wonder of what a superhero fight can be.
Yeah, especially because you've got all these people that you've rooted for almost in individual movies at this point, like Falcon and a few others haven't got their own movie, but every one of these guys pretty well, and you're seeing their fighting styles go into this and how they would match up. It's that old question of like who would win in a fight between like so and so, and you get to see a lot of that in little sections there. I don't know how long that fight was, but it's about as long as you can make a fight. Like
I think it was about 15 minutes is what I read.
Yeah.
From start to, like when they get to the airport and Spider-Man shows up, from that to, they get out. I think it's about 15 minutes. And it's not like nonstop just brawling. I mean, there's moments of talking and, comedy and bits. They do a great job of cutting back and forth to different people.
Yeah, there's like 3 different fights happening at any given time. And let's talk about Spider-Man for a second, because they nailed it. Like they nailed really Peter Parker.
For anybody who reads the comics, you will love the moments when he's in the airport and he's like wailing on Falcon, bird suit man. I love that comment where he gets the invoice for the Falcon suit. He's like, bird suit? What is this? And the Winter Soldier. But he's talking all the time, and that's one of Spider-Man's things. He just talks and talks and talks, and Falcon just totally hangs a lampshade on that, and he says, have you ever been in a fight before? There's not usually this much talking. Which is just such a great knowing comic book moment of, yeah, Spider-Man talks a lot in his fights, and they work that in and still don't make it too unbelievable, but also make the other characters acknowledge, like, holy crap, you talk a lot. And then in the same fight, Spider-Man looks at Cap's shield and he's like, that thing does not obey the laws of physics at all.
That was one of those scenes where like the entire theater just burst out laughing. But whenever I saw that they were going back to Queens to pick someone up, I was like, oh, crap, he's here. Because I know they were saying that he was going to have a fairly small role. And it's not like he was forcing the plot forward that much. But we got a little bit more Spider-Man than I ended up expecting. And I was really happy with what they did here. Like, more so than like the Tobey Maguire or the Alex Garfield Spider-Man so far. Like, we'll see whenever he gets his own movie. And they made it abundantly clear that he's getting his own movie.
Yeah, Spider-Man will return. Although they didn't say exactly when. I think they have a release date. But, I mean, to be fair, he was kind of a cameo, right? He doesn't advance the plot in any particular way. Tony's just like, we need some help. I'm going to go get this guy I know. Scarlet Witch says, my guy's downstairs. Or not Scarlet Witch, Scarlet Johansson. I always get this wrong.
Black Widow.
Why does everybody have to have colors in their names? Her name's Scarlet. There's a character named Scarlet. Her actual Black Panther, Black Widow, Scarlet Witch. Anyway, she says, my guy's downstairs. Where's yours? Where's your guy? And it just cuts to like Queens with a giant like Queens on the logo. And I was like, I know what's going to happen. It's going to be Spider-Man. Oh my gosh. Spider-Man now.
And just that whole conversation that Stark has with Aunt May and Spider-Man whenever they first meet. It's perfect.
And that's a really great example of, because these are, you know, sort of whole universes, you do have to have those moments that are maybe part of the next story, and they drop into this one. And in the Avengers Age of Ultron, they had the, you know, the Thor tub time machine plot, which really felt like a departure. Like, you kind of like, what are we doing here? The Russos really handle this well, where even though it is a departure from the main plot, it doesn't seem like something that's just thrown in there because we need to have a Spider-Man movie. Exactly. Like you can see that that's how it's going, but it's still very satisfying on its own. It's not like some random plot where you're like, why are we here? You're enjoying watching this, even if it isn't necessarily contributing to the Captain America versus Iron Man stuff. It's still a really effective piece of filmmaking. Definitely.
I was wondering about like which side Thor would have ended up falling on if he would have been in there. I'm kind of thinking it would have been more on Cap's side, but I don't think he cared, like, just because I don't think he cares that much about like Earth law.
Yeah, he's a god. Is a god going to be like, yes, I will definitely let your governments of your world tell me what to do? No. I think that Thor is just going to do what he wants to do, and if somebody tries to arrest him, he's going to fly away.
Yeah.
Like, he has no problem with breaking our laws. That would be interesting to see, though. I would have liked to see him. I don't think he needed to be in this movie. He wouldn't have really fit in this movie, but it would have been fun to kind of get his perspective. I honestly think Banner, you know, he's not in this movie either, obviously, but Black Widow at one point asks Tony, do you really think, you know, the Hulk would be on our side? And I think that Bruce Banner would be on the side of the Accords, but I don't know, like, how is the Hulk going to be on any, like, it's taking orders? He's just going to go off and do his own thing. And that's sort of an interesting dichotomy that would have been cool to explore, that he's just something that you kind of point in the direction of the fight and hope that he punches the right dudes, but he's not going to take orders.
Yeah. Especially not after Avengers 2, where he was just kind of destroying everything. He was a little more loose cannon than I expected. That was a little bit of a mind control thing, which this movie does a little bit too, but again, it doesn't feel out of place. It's not like Loki level mind control or anything like that. Like it feels like a legit Hydra / Soviet experiment for some of the things that happened there.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Winter Soldier, we know from previous experience, he's been brainwashed to be this killer, this assassin type. And so, one of the main plot points in this is that he can still be activated with his old code words. And I won't go into specifics of how all that plays out, but again, it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like he at that point, there are enough other people who are acting within their own motivations and still fitting in with that machine where it's not like, and now we go to the part of the plot where we have to advance it with mind control. It's still pieces moving around the board by design rather than just somebody, taking control of somebody else so that they'll have to fight.
I did also like with Winter Soldier where he wasn't sure if he was even worth all the pain that he was causing for everybody else. Like at that point, because he's fighting for his life, but he sees what he's doing to Cap and like what he's doing to Cap's friends. And it's just like a moment where he has to understand, like, is my life really worth all this damage that I'm causing for everybody else?
Well, and I like that he takes responsibility. He says when they're in the Quinjet flying to where they're going at that point in the movie, Cap says, it's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing. And he says, yeah, but I still did it. And I like that he's not willing to just be like, yeah, it was okay. I was under mind control, you guys. Like, he still understands that he has responsibility, even more so than Cap does. Cap wants to just let him off the hook and be like, yeah, well, it's no big deal. And he says, no, but there was some level where I was involved with that, and I can't just let that go. I can't just be, yeah, that was me, but it wasn't really me, and sort of shrug it off. He needs to have that catharsis. And doesn't really get it in this film, but sets up a lot for him to be able to try to get that in the future. And I'll kind of go back to something that happens earlier in the film. Earlier, Tony Stark introduces that scene with his parents with the hologram thing, which it was really interesting how they did that. When I saw that, I was like 100% sure that thing was going to come back and fake somebody out later.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I took a mental note. I was like, oh, they're going to totally get somebody to admit something, or they're going to freak him out, or they're going to think that they've got the jump on him, but they're in a hologram, things like that. But it didn't.
Yeah, and I like that they didn't do that, because that almost, I mean, there's certainly a scenario where that could be an amazing moment in the plot, but
yeah, and eventually Scarlet Witch is probably going to like project something like that to like mess with somebody's head, kind of like in Avengers 2, but still, like it set up more what was happening, like a major part of the conflict later, which I didn't know that part of the conflict was happening until it was actually revealed.
Yeah, and that was just such a brilliant moment of, here's something that we're setting up. It feels, and maybe even, I don't know if this was misdirection, maybe the fact that it was some weird hologram and not a flashback was meant to sort of not put you fully in the moment. But you see Tony trying to deal with that seeing that he's still affected by the deaths of his parents, and that, you know, that moment, and the Pepper Potts stuff, even though it's really just an excuse not to have Pepper Potts in this movie, Tony Stark is not just playing it off like, yeah, Pepper Potts is somewhere else. Like, he says to Cap, hey, you know, our relationship's on the rocks because of all the stuff that I've done, you know, and who I am, and I'm a hard person to deal with, and I've, you know, maybe she doesn't agree with everything that I would have liked to kind of see that conversation where she sort of confronts him with, here's, you know, you're not maybe doing all the best good, but even so, to have him really visibly affected by something that could have just been like, you know, she's not here. I thought added even more depth to his character, that he's already carrying around a lot of weight when everything starts to go down. And that's what's pushing him down this path, to try to find a better person within himself, to become that better person somehow.
Yeah. And he's changed so much since that first Iron Man movie, like, where he was just a very self-centered playboy type of guy. And now, like, to get to the point where he's gone, like, it's crazy to see over the course of, like, how many of these movies has he been in? Like 5 or 6 now?
I'm not going to stop and try to count, but it's been a good number. And there's some where he's shown up, I think, as an ancillary character as well.
Like in the first Hulk movie, he was there for like 35 seconds. So I wouldn't really count that. That's just like a cutscene.
But I did. I mean, everything with him, I think this movie does better. What I think Iron Man 3 was trying to do was like to convince me that there was the weight of the world on his shoulders. But in Iron Man 3, I just never bought into PTSD broken down Tony Stark. I just like the way he played it in that. And I'm maybe going to give some flack to Shane Black here for the way he directed it, because I can see now in this movie that he actually can really bring that gravitas. But I never quite got past the I'm cracking jokes and being smug and, oh yeah, by the way, I feel sad about New York, but I'm still basically Robert Downey Jr. And in this one, I see more of that of, okay, no, yeah, he actually really is affected. And I buy into that in this movie in a way that I really didn't in Iron Man 3. I don't hate Iron Man 3, but that's one of the things that I felt like was, for me, was mishandled, that they never quite convinced me that Robert Downey Jr. was this shell-shocked veteran of a really craptastic battle.
Well, I kind of wonder if they weren't able to go in the same directions as the comic were, because he was mostly sidelined. Like the Rise of War Machine was predicated a lot on him having substance abuse issues, like just full on, like a little bit of PTSD and a lot of alcohol are kind of what sidelined him.
And they've never really gone that way they've showed his alcohol problems occasionally, but they've never gone deep into Tony Stark as a drunk.
Yeah, it's more like he's hungover and all that. Like, it's nothing where it's just like a constant thing.
And I could really see that being a major part of Infinity War, honestly. I could, especially after all of this, of all the things that he's had revealed, of all the friendships that are broken by this movie, I could see him just like hanging out in Stark Manor or whatever his mansion is called, or in Avengers Tower, and just drinking himself silly trying to forget like how bad the world, because even though he's doing what he thinks is right, like it's just everything is going bad for him.
Yeah, especially if Pepper stays out of it even longer, like just the isolation that he's going to have.
Right. And what Cap says to him about family is really true. He needs to have that support structure. And, you know, hopefully I would love to see that be his arc. Like in, you know, Infinity War, he starts out just, you know, alone and sort of a shell of a guy, and kind of hopefully is able to mend some of these fences going forward and get back some of that support structure or not. I mean, if he doesn't, that what happens to that character? You know, I don't know, they're going to kill him off, but I would love to see that eventually happen. I would love to see some people start to die off.
That was my biggest problem with this movie. I was really disappointed with that last night. Like, and we're getting into some hard spoiler territory, like where there's just not enough consequence for the things that are happening on screen. And it was a perfect opportunity to kill any number of people off. Like, they couldn't even pull the trigger on.
Yeah, I also had that problem. I didn't ruin the movie for me. I still enjoyed it, but I felt like that ultimately what I was hoping was this giant weighty, like, you know, the world crashing down, despite the fact that all of these relationships are definitely in a shambles. It feels like they're still leaving it. We're like, guys, we can just hop back on the horse for the next movie. It'll be fine. We'll set everything back right up.
I wanted there to be like a hard division driven between like Cap and Iron Man. I wanted him to kill.
That would have been interesting. The other thing that I read as a criticism, and I kind of agree with it and disagree with it at the same time, because I went and I was like, what, you know, I looked at the Rotten Tomatoes score, it's 92%. So I was like, what are these 8% of critics saying that was a problem? And for one, by the way, if I said this to my wife as I was going home, and I still stand by this, if you didn't like this movie and you can articulate to me why you didn't like this movie, I'm fine with that. You know, I don't, like, it's not like I'm some kind of weird fanboy. And I went on a lot of these sites, not a lot, but several sites where people were saying, I didn't like it because of this, this, and this. And, you know, the comments are full of rabid fanboys just like, you're just doing this for attention. I don't know what I mean, maybe that's possible.
I'm sure at least one of the people that's doing like the 8% of that 8% is looking to get clicks. But I think that most people, like, if you were to, what I'm thinking you're getting at is saying that if somebody were able to tell you why they didn't like it, you would think that they would have credit like there, that it wouldn't just be like an opinion like devoid of merit. Well, because there are some issues.
One of the valid criticisms I read, and I'll sum it up kind of in my own way, is that when you boil it right down, that airport scene is kind of filler. It's glorious, wonderful, amazing superhero action filler. But from the standpoint of what does this do for the story, it's 6 guys trying to get to, well, really 2 guys trying to get to a plane and 6 other people trying to stop them. That's it. Like, that's, and nobody's even really trying to kill each other in that scene. So there's, I mean,
there's
Captain
one
America maybe
person
trying to kill Bucky.
No, Bucky's trying to be killed by Black Panther.
Yes, you're right. Black Panther trying to kill Bucky. But
that's still the only person that's like really willing to like spill blood there. But even like Scarlet Witch tells Jeremy Renner's character, why can't I think of his name right now? Hawkeye. Like that, like the word Hawkeye just like was out of my brain. But like she's like, you're pulling your punches. She like calls him out on it.
She ragdolls Black Widow right into like an airport cart. Like she just I was like, that's one of those moments where I was thinking, if these were real people, she would not be getting up. She does not have enough superpowers to deal with like just being smashed into that tractor or whatever it was. I don't care how much training you got. Like a psychic superpower lady grabs you by the neck and whips you across an airport. There's
some head trauma there.
There's a lot of rubber people in this movie too, like, and it's fine because it's fun and action. But there were moments where I was like, "This is not how this would go." Even I know that these people have extra, like Captain America is stronger and tougher than normal people, but he's still doing a lot of stuff that should still really hurt him. And you got a lot of bloodless punching in this.
Falcon needs a helmet. Like,
He
seriously,
does.
like, he's gone through so many, like, glass panes and stuff going, like, 60 miles an hour. Get that man a helmet.
He does do that cool thing with the wings, like, dropping in front of him to shield him from bullets, which I think this is the first time we've seen that, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, Falcon in this one, like, he's turned into, like, I didn't know if he would ever really become, like, a really strong character in this, but I really liked him in this. I liked him in Ant-Man with his little cameo and everything, but he's developed into a really good character over the past few movies.
But definitely that airport scene, it really feels like, hey, let's stop and have a cool scene here where heroes fight each other. And I don't fault it. I feel like it's still a really cool scene and it doesn't like ruin the movie for me. But that is a legitimate criticism I feel like somebody could make, is to say, hey, this is in the scope of the movie, of this conflict between these people with these ideological differences. This is just really taking a break and having people punch each other and having fun with the superheroes' abilities. And if you are 100% invested in finding out, like, in everything being working towards that end goal and all of it being fluid, I feel like that scene, as wonderful and amazing as it is almost like something from a different film.
You could say that, but it's so good. Like, I don't care. I just wanted to watch.
I don't care either,
like,
Tony.
That's the, like, just really the things that Ant-Man does. Like, just so many good things.
But it is, again, you bring up Ant-Man, but Ant-Man and Spider-Man, basically, they're just like, all right, well, we have to go get these characters so we can have this extra people in this scene. They don't. Ant-Man contributes nothing to the plot. He contributes a lot to that scene being awesome, and he's great in his 5 seconds, and Spider-Man, too, contributes a lot. But even Spider-Man, I thought, okay,
remember that really old movie, The Empire Strikes Back?
They do give him some lines where he says, Iron Man told me that, you thought you were doing the right thing and, that would be a problem. But he never questions whether maybe Cap is actually, like, he doesn't ever have a moment where he thinks, am I on the right side here? Which I can understand.
He seemed a little starstruck by Tony Stark. And also, I'm sure Tony Stark, just because he is a nerd guy, is pretty much his hero. So to just have him show up at his house and everything, he's like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want, Tony. Let's do this.
It definitely wasn't a thing where I was like, what? It wasn't way out of character or anything, but it would have been interesting to see a little bit more of him, questioning himself, questioning why he's there. And, and they have that great moment at the end where they're basically just like, all right, you're out of the movie now. Like, they almost say that.
Yeah, they let him tap out, basically.
He says, yeah, Iron Man says to him, you're done. And he says, no, I'm good. I'm good. You know what, I'm done. Which I saw some people complaining that Captain America shouldn't be able to beat Spider-Man in the kind of fight that they were in. And I was wondering, I need to go back and watch it again. I think if Spider-Man lands a punch on Captain America and it doesn't completely wreck his shop, that's a problem. But I don't know if Spider-Man ever goes full, like, I'm trying to completely end you, Captain America. And he's a young kid. And he's inexperienced, so some of that could be forgiven a little bit.
This is probably his first fight with enhanced humans. Like, if
it could be, yeah.
Because, like, you see him doing a little bit of stuff where he, like, stops a car, he ties up some robbers, he does a bunch of different things like that. But this might be the first time he's ever had a real threat facing him. Or at least someone that's on his level. And it's crazy that he's like the 4th strongest Marvel character, something like that.
He's pretty strong.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the fascinating things about Marvel, right? Is that they don't have these massively overpowered giants. I mean, one of the interesting things about Scarlet Witch, and there's a couple times in this movie where you're like, where is Scarlet Witch? This fight would be over if she was here. And she does show up eventually, and they use her in some really interesting ways. But I read an interview with Elizabeth Olsen, and she talked about how the Russo brothers had problems with Scarlet Witch, not as in like, we don't like this character, but they were like, she's essentially on God level. How do we incorporate her into a fight and not just have the fight instantly end?
Yeah.
And part of their process was coming to understand what her limitations were and how they could work with her in the confines of the story. It really helps that her and Vision end up on opposite sides of some of these fights. And again, that's such a great, I mean, her and Vision have this relationship that kind of mirrors Tony and Captain America, because in almost a more powerful way, because they are not like, they don't go full blown romance with them, although that's something that it does happen in the comics, but you can tell that they're into each other, and he's a guy and she's a girl, and they're kind of both different, and they're on a level where they really are the only people who can fully understand each other. And so to have them have those moments of, you know, he's trying to protect her by keeping her caged, and she breaks out and they end up fighting, like, those moments feel almost more real to me than some of the Tony and Cap stuff.
And like, especially some of the Avengers that seem like they're a little bit on the fence about like who they're fighting. Like, Hawkeye never seems like he really wants to hurt anybody.
Well, and like you said, he gets called out for that. But it's understandable. For one thing, he's retired. I'm sure he'll end up coming back, but he's like, I didn't want to do this anymore. I got called back in. Like, I'm not really interested in killing basically my best friend in the world in this fight, you guys.
Yeah.
I don't care what you say about pulling my punches, Wanda. I just want them to get to the plane. Okay. That's all I'm here for.
Which is the next movie coming up? Is that Black Panther's movie, or is that like late 2017? I can't remember.
Man, it's Doctor Strange and Black Panther are coming soon.
And then Thor Ragnarok after that,
Thor Ragnarok is the one that's coming, I think. So you have, I think it's Doctor Strange at the end of the year, November. I think Thor Ragnarok next. And then we get Avengers Infinity War. I think that's the order we're getting them in. Parts 1 and 2. They've said that they're retitling Infinity War. So I don't know exactly what it'll be called when it comes out.
They're fitting a Captain Marvel and a Guardians of the Galaxy somewhere in there.
I think some of those are going to come out in between Infinity War and parts 1 and 2. I don't know exactly what all the... I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know if there's going to be a gap of time between the Infinity War movies. Because Marvel does an interesting thing where their whole timeline essentially is supposed to take place in real time. So this movie takes place in 2016, essentially. The next movie. So when Infinity Wars come out 1 year apart, I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know if they're going to have like an actual year of time in between the end of Infinity War Part 1 and the end of Infinity War Part 2, or if they're going to leave it on a cliffhanger and start right back up at the beginning of that story. But generally, their modus operandi is this stuff happens in the order that you see it and in the essential timeline that you see it. So when Iron Man, the movie, drops in 2009, I think
it was actually 2007.
Well, whenever it drops,
yeah, you're right.
That's when Iron Man, the story, takes place. And so we're taking now in 2016, referring back to Iron Man in 2009 as if those events occurred in that timeline, which I think is great. It does make me wonder what they're doing with Infinity War.
I really do appreciate the way that works, though, because like you can refer back and be like, well, New York was like 4 years ago. Like, I don't think there's been a movie franchise that was so kind of in tune with that had the ability to pull that, like a full real time, like 2 or 3 years between these major events and everything, and have it line up perfectly.
And it really does add weight to it as well. Because we've been on this journey with these characters. One of the reviews that I read the negative reviews I read that I disagreed with was that you kind of had to have the previous Marvel movies to get context for what's happening here. There's like a plot point that I thought that Cap knows something that is not discussed in this movie that he knows, but I mean, eventually he reveals that he knows it. But generally, I felt like they did a great job of making this self-contained enough where you can come into this having never watched any Marvel movies before and still get why these people are the way they are. They give them enough ground rules, you know, they show what's happening and they give you enough flashback to be like, this is the setup. Even if you've never seen a Marvel movie before, there's enough there for you to dig your teeth in and say, I understand this. I'm not confused by what's going on.
Yeah. And the person I was with wasn't as in tune with it. Like, I had to explain really quickly, just through whispers, who Agent Carter was. Like, just various little things like that. But it wasn't enough that they could be pulled out.
I guess you do need to kind of know that he was in love with her. That is tricky. But also, what's the point of building? I'm going to contradict what I just said. What's the point of building this giant shared universe if you can't build off of the stuff that's already happened? they are sequels and in the best sense that we're continuing on. And I think enough people are on the journey that we appreciate that. And if people aren't on the journey, I wouldn't be... The movie's not ruined if you don't know who Peggy Carter is. But if you do know who Peggy Carter is, that scene really kind of hits home and fits with with Cap's journey.
Yeah, and like that's the reason why you can have so many sequels for this and actually have it work, because a lot of times whenever they design a sequel for a movie, there's no overarching plan, there's no connective tissue between it, and that becomes kind of a problem. Whereas this entire cinematic universe is just so well plotted out that everything's just building on each other.
And I think that is most of what we have to say without giving giant spoilers, Tony.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's something we didn't cover. I feel like we did a pretty good job. I will mention this. Some of my favorite moments were when the female characters, the other agent, whatever number she is, Agent 13 and also Black Widow were beating up Winter Soldier. I don't know. There's something like a lot of fun about those women just wailing on him, even though they didn't really do a lot of damage. Those fight scenes just had some, maybe it's just the girl power thing where like I'm just, like women punching people, sort of seeing that dynamic, gender dynamic upended a little bit, but they didn't. Oh, I didn't expect disrespectable.
I didn't think Agent 13 would be like the type to just run in against Bucky and just start throwing roundhouse kicks. And she's not the most effective ever, but she's also kind of fearless about it. It was badass.
So great. There are people calling this the best superhero movie of all time. I'm not ready to do that, Tony. I think The Dark Knight still has a real solid place in that spot. This is good. This is really good. But it definitely is on the level of Winter Soldier. Maybe not. I'm still not convinced this is better. This has better moments and better sort of, like the airport scene is really great. But I think Winter Soldier as a self-contained story, as it doesn't have that padding, even though you can argue, again, airport scene's wonderful. There are these moments that sort of are asides that they don't take away from the film. They don't ruin the film for me, but I could definitely hear an argument that Winter Soldier is a better movie. Definitely hear an argument. I would make the argument that The Dark Knight's a better movie. And even though it's a little bit more fluff than this movie, I think that my initial experience with the Avengers was a far better experience in the theater than this.
The first time I saw Avengers blew my mind. So I was like, I would agree with you there. But a lot of this is just because we've seen some of it before, so they can't quite stretch it as far as they did with the Avengers.
Yeah, I'm not dissing this by any stretch of the imagination, but I personally am not ready to go on record as being like best superhero movie of all time. Certainly the best one we've seen this year.
Yeah, definitely.
And great, we didn't touch on the great moments of humor as much. The guys in the back of the Volkswagen.
I don't think you understand the principle of a getaway car. It's like three giant dudes.
No.
Like, even just seeing Chris Evans climb out of a little Volkswagen was pretty funny, just because he's so much bigger. But that was definitely a good scene. Just there's a lot of good stuff peppered in. Even in some of the fights, there's some good humor. The only fight that's humorless is probably that last fight.
Yeah, and it needs to be.
Yeah.
It really needs to be for you to buy into what's going on. But that's our review of Winter Soldier, you guys. We went longer. This is our longest standalone review, Tony. Usually podcasts go for an hour. We talk about other stuff. But this is definitely our sort of most in-depth review. And I don't think we spoiled too much.
Yeah.
I think we did a pretty good job. I'll beep some stuff out.
Yeah, once the beeps are in there, it'll be good. Like, we might want to put a little thing at the beginning just saying, like, hey, there's a couple spoilers. See the movie if you don't want to be spoiled. But I think if you haven't seen it, you could still have a lot of fun after listening to this. Anyway, hope you guys have an awesome day. Head over to humanechoes.com for more content. Subscribe to the podcast. Give us a rating on iTunes. Become a member to get bonus podcasts and bonus content and really cool merchandise. Hope you guys have an awesome weekend, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Don't sass him.
Also, I thought the fire was supposed to spread. What the heck?
It's raining.
Oh. Well, that's a low.
Any other completely inaccurate things you want to scream out at? The trees are dropping things on me and the fires aren't spreading! Well, actually...